Thank you. It's good to be here today. And my name is Sean Wilson. I'm a research biologist with Idaho Department of Fish and Game. I think I might be the lone kokanee talk here at the sockeye workshop. We're working on some nutrient restoration, which, as we saw earlier, was really pioneered in the sockeye nursery lakes, and I think it's fairly applicable whether we're working over on the resident side like we are, or whether you're working on the anadromous side like most of the rest of you folks are. Should go forward, right? Yeah. Oh, there it went. Okay. So if you're wondering where in the world Dworshak Reservoir is, we're here in north central Idaho. It's an impoundment on the North Fork of the Clearwater River. Dworshak Dam is the tallest straight axis dam in North America. It was completed in 1972, about 2 kilometers from the confluence with the main stem Clearwater River near the town of Orofino. Backed up a reservoir that's about 86 kilometers long and just a shade under 7,000 hectares at full pool. No, it's going backwards now.
I'll advance it for you.
Okay, thanks. You want me to just tell you when I'm ready then? Okay, thank you. Like a lot of other reservoirs, Dworshak suffers from nutrient dysfunction for various reasons. I know a lot of folks working in sockeye lakes are worried about a reduction in marine-derived nutrients from reduced spawning escapements. There was no fish passage built at Dworshak, so we're suffering from a complete elimination of marine-derived nutrients. It's also a very low productive watershed to begin with, a lot of shallow soils over basalts and granite, so there's not a lot of nutrients that get washed into the reservoir. It undergoes some fairly severe fluctuations. Pool elevation has dropped a minimum of 80 feet or 24 meters in a given year. It's usually a full pool for maybe a couple of weeks or maybe only a few days during a given year. We'll hit full pool in late June to early July, and then after 4th of July weekend, they pull the plug and start releasing that deep, cold hypolonitic water to cool the Snake River down for the benefit of anadromous fish. So over in this far picture, you can see we get a lot of, a lot of bare banks most of the year, and essentially no functional littoral zone. We'll go next one. So as a result, you can see our nutrient levels in terms of available nitrogen and phosphorus P have declined over the years. And the ratio of these are also important. Red field ratio tells us we want something like at least 10 times more N to P in a lake. And if we have a good N to P ratio, we typically get growth of beneficial edible types of phytoplankton, which feed the zooplankton, which get channeled into fish production. Dworshak typically suffers from nitrogen limitation, and when we only have phosphorus around, we tend to get dominance of these nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria like Anabaena. These can't be grazed off by zooplankton, so they tend to short-circuit the food web. They tend to just kind of grow and hang out in the water column, so they degrade overall water quality, and species like Anabaena can be toxic, so they're also a health concern. Next. You can see in a typical water year, with the spring freshets, we get relatively high available nitrogen, shown by the blue bars. Then we tend to get growth of more edible types of phytoplankton, and those quickly use up that pool of available nitrogen. So then we get into July here. You can see you've got these short little blue bars. I'm actually averaging in non-detects of nitrogen as if they were at the detection level. So that's essentially, no available nitrogen left in the system. And then we begin to see a dominance of Anabaena here, shown by these the red bars there that typically occur late summer and into the fall. Okay, next slide. So the current project is a partnership between Fish and Game and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We started fertilizing in 2007, and the Corps of Engineers engineers, handles the fertilizer applications. They apply a liquid ammonium nitrate weekly usually from either April or May, depending on the year, through the end of September. They just basically fill up this tanker truck and drive it onto the barge. Darren Brandt with Advanced Eco Solutions provides a fertilizer prescription, and then the Corps uses this electronic metering equipment with the GPS to accurately meter out the fertilizer along the length of the reservoir, which is mixed into the prop wash at the end of the barge. Darren's prescriptions start out fairly light in the fall when we already have a pool of available nitrogen out there, and then as we get into July, when that's used up, it gets ramped up to as much as about 2,600 gallons per week, which sounds like a lot, but keep in mind that goes into something like 93 billion gallons of surface water, so the theoretical concentration is actually fairly low there. I should also mention this project was, when we started this project, the Corps went to US EPA to ask for a permit to do this. EPA responded back that, well, you're doing this to benefit the environment, and we're not sure you really need a permit, and we're kind of backlogged. So the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality stepped up and issued a permit. In 2010, there was a legal challenge to that permit, and at that point, EPA said, oh, well, maybe you should have a permit. So late 2010, we had to stop applications, and then it wasn't until spring of 2012 that we got all that straightened out and were able to start applying again, which gives us kind of an interesting data point there where we had a pause to these nutrient applications. Go ahead. Fish and Game does the monitoring for this, so we currently have actually 6 stations on the reservoir that we monitor, 4 along this, try to get the pointer to work, but 4 along the main section of the reservoir maybe. Yeah, maybe we do this way. So 4 of them are along the main section of the reservoir here, 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 and here, and that's where the fertilization takes place. And these 4 have been monitored consistently for, going back as early as 2004, depending on what we're looking at. So that's the data that I'm going to present here in a little bit. We monitor things like, we do temperature and DO profiles, we do water clarity, we look at nutrient concentrations, picoplankton, phytoplankton, zooplankton, and then we also monitor kokanee using hydroacoustics and midwater trawls. Okay. So this is a point where I'm going to kind of shift away from a lot of pictures and go into some numbers and graphs, so I know it's after lunch, so bear with me. First up is nitrogen, and this is just some box plots of measurements of nitrogen concentration. The gray shading indicates the years that we added nitrogen to the reservoir, and basically the take-home message here is that even though we've been adding, lately as much as 70 tons of nitrogen to the reservoir every year, we can't see a measurable increase in the amount of nitrogen. And that's because it's absorbed by the phytoplankton very, very rapidly. These measurements are actually taken usually 4 days after the barge goes through and applies the fertilizer. When we've been out same day, we can't detect anything after about 8 hours. Okay. This graph shows measurements of primary productivity in terms of daily carbon uptake. This is kind of an expensive thing to do, so I only have 4 years of data here. The gray bar from 2011 was a non-fertilizer year, and then the blue bars are years that we fertilized. We should mention too, 2007 was the first year, and we didn't add as much nitrogen that year, and they added a little bit of phosphorus, so the mix was about 15:1 N to P, and then they later dropped the phosphorus from the prescription and ramped up the nitrogen because it was obviously the system was so nitrogen limited. And you'll see particularly the later years there where the nitrogen was ramped up, we got a pretty significant increase, at least over 2011 in terms of primary productivity. So I imagine at this point everybody's thinking, wow, they're really greening this reservoir up, and I wonder what the fish production is going to be like in terms of how much the water quality was degraded. But This graph shows mean annual chlorophyll concentrations. And kind of the take-home message here at the end is, really the mean for the fertilizer period is not much different than the non-fertilizer period, and if anything, maybe just a shade lower. So you may be wondering, well, how's that working if we're cranking up primary productivity and not really seeing the reservoir green up? And this slide shows mean annual biovolume of phytoplankton, and it's kind of similar to what we were seeing with chlorophyll. We got some annual variation there, especially at the beginning, but essentially no difference between the biovolume of phytoplankton or algae out in the reservoir, whether we're fertilizing or not. And so how does that work? Well, this slide actually shows the fraction of that total biovolume that's represented by edible species, things that can be grazed off by zooplankton. And you'll see when we started fertilizing, we saw this nice increase in the first period. As soon as we stopped fertilizing for a year, it crashed back down to where it started, and then things got a little bit messier in the second period, but overall, we see an increase in the percentage of the phytoplankton that we see out there that's edible. And keep in mind, too, this is standing stock of edible phytoplankton, and this is stuff that can be grazed off. So just because you see an increase in production doesn't mean that you're going to see more out in the lake there if it's being actually consumed by zooplankton. And this is our nitrogen-fixing blue-green or cyanobacteria Anabaena. So this is what we would typically see would be dominant in the reservoir in kind of late July through even into October. What we see, like before we started fertilizing, it was fluctuating there around 10 to 30% of the annual biovolume. But then we start fertilizing, we see Anabaena starts to come down, especially by the second through fourth year there. We stopped fertilizing and Anabaena came back with a vengeance. And then we started up and Anabaena dropped right back down. We had 2015 was a bad year around our region for blue-green algae, and if that represents a bad year for us under the fertilization, that's probably a good thing. And you'll see that on average we go from somewhere around 20% or more of annual phytoplankton being Anabaena to down around 5% or often less. So one of the reasons why we're interested in the increasing primary productivity and especially channeling this into edible stuff is because we want to increase prey availability for kokanee. So one thing we see when we look in kokanee stomachs in our reservoir is if there's any Daphnia available in the reservoir, 90% or more of what we find in their stomachs is Daphnia. And for fish 100 millimeters long or longer, those Daphnia are pretty much all 0.8 of a millimeter or longer. So this graph is the mean biomass per liter of those consumable sized Daphnia. And yeah, there's some interannual variation there, but you'll see on average we see about double the biomass of these consumable Daphnia when we're fertilizing. One thing to note here too, 2012 rolled along and things were going really good, lots of Daphnia, big kokanee. 2013, not too bad. Then we hit this data point 2014, and people looked at that and said, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? Why isn't this working anymore? And so that got me to thinking about, well, one thing you don't see on this graph is that 2012, low kokanee abundance, and then as we get into 2014, we're back to a high kokanee abundance. So how's that kokanee abundance affecting the Daphnia? Okay. And so we see if we plot out the Daphnia biomass by kokanee abundance, that we'll see indeed we see a reduction in Daphnia biomass as kokanee biomass increases. And that relation in and of itself wasn't particularly strong, but if we add in whether or not we're fertilizing as a covariate, so white data points and line there show the relationship without the fertilizer and yellow with the fertilizer, we'll see basically we just shifted that whole relationship up. So at any given level of abundance, we have a lot more Daphne out there. In fact, this data point right here, this is our 2014 data point where everybody said, hey, what's happening, why isn't it working? And you'll see, we're actually about where we would expect to be considered the kokanee abundance we have. So the next thing we would see that we're growing more prey for the kokanee. The next thing we want to know is how are we affecting kokanee growth. One thing that we did there is we were able to measure annual growth increments using scales. And then we took all these annual growth increments and we put them into this equation that was developed by Sanford Weisberg, which basically what it does is it allows us to pull out effects from things like age and individual fish. And what we're interested in here is we're interested in this Y, or this annual growth effect. In other words, how much is growth changing from year to year? And then what we did is we borrowed a technique from Mike Quist, and we tried to look at how other factors affected this annual growth. And what we see is as kokanee abundance increases, annual growth decreases, which isn't a surprise. When we have a lot more kokanee, they tend to be smaller. As we put nutrients into the reservoir, annual growth tends to be a little higher. And also as Daphnia biomass increases, fish tend to grow better. And if you rank these things out using AIC weights, we see far and away Daphnia biomass is really the driver here of kokanee growth, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. The reason why we have small fish when we have a lot of them out there is because all these fish are driving the Daphnia biomass down. There's less food for them to eat, and so we have smaller kokanee. They don't grow more just because we're putting more nitrogen in the reservoir. Putting that nitrogen in the reservoir affects the phytoplankton populations, increases our Daphnia production, and then the kokanee have more to eat. So we can kind of piece this together through these trophic levels, how we're able to get better kokanee growth through the nutrient additions. And just to see how that's affecting the kokanee population, this is mean kokanee biomass. Again, fertilized in the gray years here. You'll see early on we were fluctuating between about 40 and 100 metric tons. And interestingly, in both of these periods, the first 3 years we don't see an effect in it, but they both ramp up here by the 4th year. Fortunately, the second time around, we got another year to put that together, so it looks like, we might be able to, to see it start fluctuating at a little higher level of biomass here. Also, this data point here, this was actually a record abundance of kokanee in the lake. We had similar abundances here and here, but we had a lot more biomass out there because we're able to grow the fish much larger at these high levels of abundance. So it looks like we're essentially increasing the carrying capacity of the lake, and we're going to be able to grow a lot more kokanee of a given size because of that. Okay. And so, yeah, I just want to wrap up by saying we'll kind of get away from those numbers and graphs and let you look at some pictures again. But the fertilizer additions have they've not just increased the phytoplankton production, but shifted these to more beneficial species, which are fueling this production of Daphnia, which appears to be leading to better kokanee growth and increased carrying capacity of the reservoir. So we have more fish around for our fishermen.